Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the benefits of what used to be called a classical education, and I'll explain a little bit more about what that really means in I suppose, more in today's context. But compare that classical education that included within it some serious study of history and thus looking at the mistakes and learning from the lessons of the past, which is critically important, but also contained within it educational rigor. It was strictly pass or fail. And if you wanted to do better in the exams and go on to, educational academic glory, then you just had to work harder. Now that's of course gone. Now compare that to the woke education. Now it doesn't mean that there aren't areas of educational rigor still today, but the woke education is very Marxist as it's currently viewed and practiced and implemented in the West today by very Marxist teachers, unions, and so on. It's to create this fantasy of a world of equality. Everyone gets a participation trophy. And to do that, of course, rigor has to very substantially suffer. But also, if you look at any ideological sort of government, whether it's the Soviet government, the 1949 revolutionary government of China, the communist government of Pol Pot in Cambodia, or anywhere where ideological government is imposed from above without the consent of the people, then they want to start at year zero, because if they accept the lessons of the past, then the imposition of ideological government cannot be accepted and will not be accepted. So they have to imagine or create a fantasy world where the past didn't exist. So we're beginning today from year one, and so that the past is all evil and bad and fascist and Hitler and da-da-da. So if we start from year one, then all the lessons of the past can be ignored, and the rationale or lack of it for the imposed ideological government can then be sidestepped or indeed avoided altogether. Now, that's the fantasy. It's quite a childish fantasy, really. If we take all the bad things out, only the paradise will remain. That's a very childlike way of looking at the world. But education, as it was seen, for example, in the Soviet Union, given that was sort of kicked off in 1917, 1918, that was their view was, if we eradicate the past or eliminate the past, then we have only the present. And therefore we can't be measured by the mistakes, failures, or successes, or whatever of the past. So we effectively deny history exists. Now, there's a bit of a cherry picking in the Soviet Union, because they would still accept the music of Tchaikovsky, for example, and he preceded the Soviet Revolution. Some of the poems and works and writings of the novelist Pushkin, that was allowed to stay, but they were very selective over what was allowed and what wasn't. So effectively, the past ceased to exist, other than the past was to be condemned and held up as an example of evil. Now, a classical education is something that I've had a couple of brushes with in my childhood. My grandparents were moderately well-to-do, so I ended up having two stints at a private school, what was like a preparatory school. It was effectively a turbocharged kindergarten, really, which is supposedly to prepare you for an upmarket private school education. Dipped out of the private school thing for a few years, then went back for about a year, a little bit less than a year, and into another private school where again a classical education was all the goal. Now, I was probably the last tranche in age group terms. I was probably the last tranche that really was exposed to the full force of what was really the classical education, the groundwork of which was put in hundreds of years previously, and in itself had developed organically as a method of education. And was it good or bad, or well, I mean, let's have a little look at that. Even at sort of 4 years old, 5 years old, you're being taught Latin and Greek, for example, and punished quite severely for not remembering it. You also had to learn one foreign language that was compulsory. French was the preferred one at the time, but which really was as in a root from the Latin. But it was expected, even as a young student, that you should spend every waking hour learning and acquiring knowledge and becoming disciplined in your thought and behaviour. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, there were kids that wasn't suited for. So, I remember kids that were getting beaten quite severely, and they probably had dyslexia or something, or they were just so thick-witted they were never going to get it. And the view that the teachers took at the time was that they wouldn't allow anybody to fail. It was quite a noble, worthwhile cause, but their methods of achieving it, I thought, were quite brutal. And I was in a fortunate position where I was reasonably quick on the uptake, so the brutality sort of wasn't something that I really had to deal with very often. And it was a rare sort of moment rather than something that I dreaded or believed was going to happen to me. But there were kids there again who were thick-witted, and even as a young child, I looked and said, "Why are you beating that kid? He's never going to get it. He's just too fucking stupid." So anyway, it was. And then again, a little bit later. But the idea of a classical education is that the mistakes. Many lessons have learned and many mistakes been made throughout history, whether it be in political organisation or military affairs or mathematics or in any field of endeavour. Now, bear in mind, technology changes, so the capacity to learn what steamships do or what the combustion engine does isn't something that the ancient Greeks knew about. But the building blocks of all learning they'd already accomplished. And if you read books like Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War, that's the Greek war between primarily Athens and Sparta in the 400s BC, you can read how the Greeks thought through and how they argued and how they attempted to persuade based on rational arguments. And even then, 500 BC and around those times, in the records that exist at least, the discussions were where one party would even refer to historical events, even from 2,500 years previous, would refer to historical events. Say, well, look at the mistakes they made. Look at the errors they made, whether it be errors of judgment or errors of understanding or failures of observation or all of the above. Look at the errors they made in 700 BC. Why at 500 BC should we make those same mistakes? Why can we not learn from the mistakes that they made, and so on? Now, if you look at the ancient Greek and ancient Roman world, with Cicero, Seneca, Homer, the whole range of classical literature which has survived thousands of years for good reason, by the way. Then we can learn from the past. But apart from learning from the past, as in not making the same mistakes that they made, we learn how, at least given examples of how to think through some of the problems and challenges that will exist for any society for all time. And this is a very valuable lesson in understanding human nature. I mean, if you look at a debates in the Roman Senate, as recorded, say, by Tacitus, the Annals of Imperial Rome. If you look at the debates there, or even Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, or Pliny, or any of those writers, and again going back to Thucydides in Athens and so on, you'll see that the sort of debates they're having and discussions they're having and the issues they're attempting to address are the same issues that parliaments all over the world today are debating. If you change the names of the people and the place names, you couldn't tell which was the modern version and which was the ancient version of the debate or discussion in the parliaments or the senates or whatever. So So we're seeing that the challenges human beings face in terms of organising, in terms of justice, in terms of the law, how laws are codified, they haven't really changed. Now, the sophistication that we have today is less, well, until recently at least, less arbitrary law. Technology obviously is very different, and probably more safeguards, or used to be. They're being taken away by the globalists at a rapid rate. More safeguards against concentration of power, things of that nature. So, but really, it's the same. We're dealing with the same things. When the Greek democracy was at its zenith, or Roman democracy, it's very close approximation of what we see today. Now we can say, but more people get to vote, or less people get to vote, or those sort of things. Sure, that's different, but the actual debates and the organisation processes, laws, and everything, the framing of laws, that's pretty much the same. That hasn't changed. So it's vital that we learn the lessons from the past. And a classical education is meant to, I mean, I'm not sure the word classical really is a good word for it, but nonetheless, I'll run with it for this essay. The classical education says that we should learn the lessons of the past, try and avoid the mistakes of the past. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Avoid the mistakes of the past, but also understand the evolution of all sorts of institutions that we came to rely on. Again, that the globalists are frantically dismantling, but rely on the institutions, understand how they came into being, why they are there, and what their purpose initially at least was, and how things like nationalism, which the globalists, of course, it gets in their way of implementing their universal ideology. So they if you're a globalist, then you're Hitler. So, but this is again part of the ideological government process. You denounce everything that went before as bad. That's the only way you can get your ideology imposed, or part of the process of delegitimizing the past, which means the present is thus legitimate by default. It's a tactic that ideologues have used throughout all time, particularly in the modern era and since the Marxist communist type government style. And it's something that the globalists are doing now. But so in order to dismantle that, the globalists don't want us knowing about the past, or learning from the past, or having the past to compare with, or understanding the present day as how it evolved organically from the past. I think these things are absolutely critical. Even something simple like the writ of habeas corpus. You can't the government can't arbitrarily grab somebody, throw them in prison without charge. Yet that is exactly what happened. Exactly what happened in the January 6th abomination and undermining of due legal process. And yet habeas corpus was a big deal. Even in 1600s Britain, for example, and it's something that I don't know, came and went a bit, I guess, but nonetheless, why are we not 400 plus years down the track? We are still struggling with, or there are forces, the globalist forces out there that effectively want to take away habeas corpus. So to allow for the arbitrary arrest of citizens just because they have the wrong fucking opinion. We should all be up in arms about that. And if we understood history, and if we understood the evolutionary processes of the legal systems that we see today, then maybe many more people would be up in arms about something like habeas corpus, but many other things. I'll pick on that as only one example. But so a classical education is rigorous, is rigorous, and it seeks to be informed by the lessons, mistakes of the past and the evolution of the society and its organizational structures that we see today. Absolutely imperative in my view. Now, but it also keeps you grounded in facts. You have to deal in facts. And even today, I was reading a book recently about the French Revolution, and I'm going to do a video on that soon, by the way. But I was reading a book about the French Revolution, and the author there, who writes nicely, it's a good bouncing along type style. He's put in a few things there, and I look at that and think, no, I don't agree with that. I don't think that holds up. And then I went to refer to other texts in order to re-inform myself about that particular moment and the other issues, and were able to read look at writers and their different points of view, or introduce other facts or other causation factors and so on. So because of that, I was able to say, yeah, okay, no, that guy is going down a particular path of inquiry and making some assumptions. And based on what I've read and know and others, I don't quite agree with that. Although that doesn't invalidate the whole point he's making. It means that some of those things aren't quite right. So again, the defaulting, I'm automatically and naturally defaulting to where are the facts, what supports this point of view, are there elements I disagree with, or for that matter agree with, and so on. Now, this is something that we've lost today in the education system, particularly in the West, again, because it's inconvenient to the globalist imposition of ideological control, only because of that. And so rigor has gone, because then everyone can get a participation trophy. But in order to do that, facts have to go. And so whether it be in college education or high school, whatever, facts have to be dispensed with, because again, they get in the way. And so they're viewed as facts have to be dispensed with, because again, they get in the way. And so they're viewed as being surplus to requirements. Now, there was a time when, and again, I was probably in the last tranche that saw this, was when you met someone who had like a PhD, for example, or even a master's, the difference you saw in them from the average, the average dude, the difference you saw in them was quite considerable. They had a disciplined way of thinking and a process of logic that other people didn't possess. In order to have that, that capacity to have that disciplined thought and the framework of thought and the capacity for that degree of logic, but similarly to be able to entertain multiple ideas at the same time and actually put them in some sort of sequential context and analyze them and discuss them or consider them. That meant it was automatically someone of higher IQ. So because the cutoff was strictly pass or fail, then people were going to university who were, by and large, not in every case, you still had the rich guy throwing money at the university to get his dumbass kid in there. I mean, you still had that, but they were very few. They were like, one in every several hundred or something, rather than every second one or two out of every three. So this idea that when you met a PhD, there was a reverential awe that sort of spread around the room. Fuck me, a PhD. Whereas today, any motherfucker has a PhD. It's if you're a black lesbian, then you're entitled to one, for goodness sakes. So anyway, the idea of a participation trophy, or came back, was that the idea of the social justice warriors. Well, look at the respect and the reverence with which PhDs are treated. Look at the respect they get. They are so respected. I know. To get equality, let's give everyone a PhD so everybody can be respected. No, you're missing the fucking point. They're not being respected because they have the PhD. It's because they've earned the PhD, and that's why they're respected. But the social justice warriors will never get that. The rush for equality or equal outcomes. The rush for equal outcomes means everyone's entitled to a PhD. So, but a classical education, I just wanted to emphasize that it has its place, learning from the past, learning how we got to where we are today, and learning and recognizing that we stand on the shoulders of people who've learned those lessons, who've been through the mill, who've thought it through, who've agonized over and busted their ass over, improving administration, improving legal practice, and moving prudential standards to a higher level. All of these sorts of things, they've all been done before. And the problems today aren't so, other than technology difference, which is a difference, other than technology differences, they really aren't that much. So it's essential we do learn from the past. And if you look at, say, the Soviet Union, this intrigued me about the Soviet Union when it kicked off in the past. And if you look at, say, the Soviet Union, this intrigued me about the Soviet Union when it kicked off, and they did this year zero thing, and the past doesn't exist. And it was amazing how many of their serious fuck ups, whether it be in crop production, moving populations around to work in factories, setting up townships, new industrial townships, and so on. That when you look at the mistakes and serious fuck ups, not just little fuck ups, but serious ones they made, it's because they made the same mistakes as were done in the past. For some reason, they thought, well, because we're doing it in a better cause, that none of those mistakes will be made. But they were, so they had to relearn the entire history of human existence first. So it was a crushing burden to bear for any society, and the only way they could navigate through it was by engineering the death of millions, and then claiming that they were morally superior to everyone else. I mean, fuck. And this is what the globalists are doing. They will and are happy to and will fully accept the eradication and, in my view at least, the death of millions of Western citizens in pursuit of their ideology. And very much part of that is to say that all the past is evil, that there was nothing but slavery and racism in the past, and therefore if we begin again, that's justified. And not only is it justified, but it's the morally right thing to do. And that will end up being the death of so many of us. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.